And was thinking the gavel makes a terrible sound. The Speaker of the House, when we were called in the session virtually, she's using a rubber hammer. So maybe I should switch to that. Anyway, the first thing on the agenda are the minutes of October 6th, 2020. Is there a motion to approve?
I move to approve the minutes of October 6th, 2020 as presented.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Page 1. Page 2. And page 3. Hearing no corrections, all those in favor of approving the minutes of October 6th, 2020, raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, and that takes care of us for tonight for the minutes. For the listening audience, there are only 3 of us here tonight. We're missing 2 people for various reasons that needed to be absent tonight. So we do have a quorum. Then we'll move on to the public comment. If anyone has any comments on any issue that they wish to discuss tonight, this is your opportunity.
Yep, Terry, I have one person at least right now, Scott Whitaker. Scott, I'm going to allow you to talk by unmuting you. You'll be connected in just a moment here.
Okay, can you folks hear me?
Yes, we can. Welcome, Scott.
Very good. Thank you, gentlemen, for letting me speak. I had reached out to Eric earlier today about status of trick-or-treating in Williston. I know it's not really under your purview too much, but it kind of is. There are a lot of parents who are questioning about what's the town and what's the state's position on trick-or-treating. I, after speaking with Eric, or at least being in contact with Eric, I did see something that came from the state on October 15th about that participation was going to be allowed. Nothing heard from the town. I wanted to assume good, no news is good news, but I was wondering if there was going to be, just for some clarity amongst the parents and townsfolk, if there was going to be something coming from the town that yes, we are going to allow for it to happen with social distancing, whatever, unless, of course, if there was to be some sort of spread or some sort of cluster that developed within Williston or within the school between now and Halloween. And secondly, I know social distancing is the key part. I know there have been, from what Eric told me, there have really been no, quote, hours of trick-or-treating. We're fortunate in this 2020 year of COVID that Halloween is falling on a Saturday. So one option I thought of, whether the town wanted to take upon it or not, is given it is a Saturday, and usually trick-or-treating would be like from 5:30 to 8 when parents got home and stuff, and you really had, hundreds of kids in a cluster of only 2 hours. Would there be a suggestion by the town or whatever, maybe opening it up to like from 3 to 8 or something like that? Therefore, your density is less because it's over a longer period. And those are just really the comments I had and wanted to get your perspective on this.
Good, thank you, Scott. We'll have a discussion, I think, at the end of our other business. We have a lot of stuff to take up between now and then as to whether we have any options to do things for trick or treaters. My own personal thought is that on a Saturday, it opens up the possibility for more adult parties and perhaps kid parties as well, because there's no school and people have more time. In my experience in town, I've never seen kids out before 5 o'clock on any day, any Halloween day, whether it's the weekday or the weekend. But that's my own personal experience. Years ago, when I first moved to town in '66, the developments were being built and kids were being brought in by the wagon loads for trick-or-treating in Williston. That doesn't happen anymore, so that's a good thing. We won't have to worry about that, I don't believe. But anyway, we'll have a discussion later on about what the options are. Is there anyone else who has any comments?
Yeah, I have a message from Carolina. Carolina, I'm going to connect you now for public comment. Just one moment.
Hi, can you all hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Great. Hi, everybody. I'm Caroline Aubrey. I live on Oak Knoll Road. Been a resident of Williston for 2 years now. This is actually my first select board meeting, and I'm really excited to be here. Hope to attend more. I just wanted to say that I've been following your budget projections, read an article in the Williston Observer, and just wanted to make some comments on that, and hopefully can be in the loop and hear more things going forward. I just wanted to say that I hear you want to level fund the police, and we're facing a big deficit, and I understand you have to find places to cut and everything, but I hear you want to level fund the police, which from my research I've noticed is one of the departments with already one of the largest and beefiest budgets. I also hear you want to cut budget funding from the Parks and Recreations Department and the library, according to this article. And as an avid community gardener, as an outdoor enthusiast and a reader, I find so much value in those entities of our community. And I just think they're staples, and really remiss to hear that they're being potentially cut from, when I think we have an opportunity to really look at other places and departments. We know full well, want to acknowledge movements going on around the country as well, and challenge Williston to think about where we're putting our priorities. If we're putting our priorities into the law enforcement and not into residents and their overall well-being, I just would love to challenge you all to maybe consider that and think about shifting priorities to reflect everything that's going around the nation, in Vermont, and how Williston can be a part of a larger push for change, and really reevaluate our values and where we're putting them. So that's all I have to say, and thank you so much for listening.
Thank you. And you'll have plenty of opportunity to listen more and tune in to select board meetings. Will be every Tuesday night in December, with the exception of the Christmas week. We'll be meeting to talk about budget, and we'll be continuing that into January, so that we'll essentially everything right now is up in the air, because we're not sure of our income for the current year, and we're certainly not sure of income for the following year. So we'll be interested in everybody's comments on that.
Great. Thank you so much, Terry.
Thanks. Any further comments from the public?
Nope, I don't see anyone else, Terry.
Then we'll move on to the interviews and appointments. We do have 3 applicants for the Planning Commission tonight, and hopefully you can put them in the loop, Eric.
Yep, I'll connect all 3 now. I see them in the waiting room. And folks, you'll be reconnecting in just a moment. If you could unmute, and if you're willing to share your video, you can do that now as well.
Happy to.
So welcome all three of you to the select board meeting. It's a little bit difficult doing this by Zoom, but we'll do as best we can. So first of all, I would like to have all of you introduce yourselves one at a time. Give us a brief summary of your background and why you're interested in being on the Planning Commission. And then we'll go into questions from members of the board, and then we'll go from there. And our policy is, when we have more than one candidate for a position, to hold off on making a determination until later on in the meeting. But the meetings are always public meetings. You're certainly welcome to tune in later on, or keep tuned in during the whole meeting if you wish to. But we'll be discussing the appointments towards the end of the evening, which we project it being somewhere in the neighborhood of about 8:30. And never sure about time, but so I'm going to ask, I'll probably get your names really messed up, but let's try Nira Valentic first.
Hi, can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, great. Thank you for having me. My name is Nira Valentic, and I'm really excited for the opportunity just to be here and the opportunity to be part of the Planning Commission. A little bit about my background is, for the past 5 years, I've been working for the state of Vermont, and I've been working in healthcare policy, business, and technology. Within that role, I was a business manager, so I worked a lot with understanding policy and rules in order to operationalize them. I also worked as a product owner to lead a team so we can build a roadmap to essentially strive towards our vision of making it easier for Vermonters to apply for healthcare programs and other benefits. Recently, I did begin working at the UVM Medical Center as an EPIC principal trainer for our electronic health record. And the reason I'm applying for this position on the Planning Commission is because I'm really excited about taking some of my skill sets and being able to help proactively plan so that we can continue to strive toward meeting the town's future vision and goals for planning and development. And I get very excited about rules and policies, even if I don't have a large background specifically in urban planning. I'm able to do my research ahead of time, really prepare for discussions, actively listen, and just contribute towards, collaborative teamwork and atmosphere. And just being able to offer up those skill sets and be a part of the Planning Commission and get more involved in the town and how we interact in the town when it comes to planning and development are some of the main reasons that I'm applying. So I'm really looking forward to answering any questions you have later on in the open panel. And again, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Ruben Escobizo.
Yeah, hi.
Welcome.
Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, so good evening, everyone. My name is Ruben Escobizo, and thank you for this chance to be able to be here. And a little bit about myself. I'm with the University of Vermont, so I'm coming from the academia side of things, and so I'm a professor there. And I also am a healthcare provider with the University of Vermont Medical Center. So not a whole lot of background, I guess, in terms of urban planning, but I think that the skill set that I think I could bring in would be the looking at the vision of the town and how that relates to the core values that the town is wanting to achieve, and want to make sure that the current plan that we have is actually representing those values of the town. I'm going to be looking at it from a methodical standpoint, academia style, and making sure that all sides are being considered. Every policy in my mind is always open to interpretation, and that's why no matter how the policy was crafted, that's the whole reason why we have different bodies that look into the interpretation of policies. So that's for the here and now, really. But looking at forward, I think it's more of the long-term thing for me, especially looking into the sustainability of the plan for Williston in terms of its development. So, and based on the travels that I've made, I travel a lot for business. So I think looking at internationally and nationally, looking at sustainable communities around the country and the world, and what are those things that we can model upon as this town of Williston. Thank you.
Thank you. And Alex Daly.
I'll do the same sound check. Everybody hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Great. It's a familiar sound. So thanks for having me, everybody. So I'm a homeowner here in Williston. I live over on the south side of 89. I've been in town for about 4 years now. Long time Vermonter, short time Willistonian. Professionally, I'm actually the president of an e-commerce company and the chief marketing officer of a multi-billion-dollar asset management company. So I come to you from the private sector side. So, senior executive, I imagine you guys can guess what skill sets I bring to the table. So I won't belabor that point. I'm not a developer, right? I am a homeowner in town. I have no conflicts, no sort of axe to grind. I don't come to the table with a viewpoint on public planning, right? I'm here as a homeowner thinking to myself, this is a wonderful town. It attracted me. My family lives here. I have 3 kids in the school system here. I love this town. And I want to see that the plan works for me, for other residents of the town. I'm really interested to start getting more involved in the town and local politics since I've come here. I've been sort of long-time listener, first-time caller here. And I'm interested to work with the select board and hear what the residents think is working about the current plan and the current zoning that's come off of that plan, understand what isn't working and what people want to see addressed, and just help make that happen. I'm used to working with big long-term decisions, budgets, etc. So I'm happy to answer any questions you guys have, but that's me.
Good. Thank you. Thanks, all of you. And so I'll open up to the board for questions. Jeff.
Sure, I'll go first then. Ask the question the same as everyone, and I was glad to hear 2 of you mention the town comprehensive plan. And so my question is have you had the chance to either read or peruse or glance at the town comprehensive plan? And if yes, if no, that's not a showstopper or anything like that. But if yes, what are your thoughts? What are we doing right? And where might we could make improvements?
So perhaps we can go ahead. Perhaps I can go in reverse order and go with Alex first, Ruben second, and Nero third.
Sure, happy to. So I read the document as recently as about 20 minutes ago.
Okay.
And a few times before that too. Eric and I have actually been in correspondence about joining the board for a little while now. Like I said, I don't come with a sort of a particular policy plan in mind, right? Like I'm not walking in here and saying like, hey, I think the town needs more of this and less of this, except that what I've seen myself and what so far my limited survey of friends in town think is working for them. I'm interested in what the select board is hearing from all of our constituents. You talk to a lot more of them than I do and far more often than I do. My initial observation is we could probably use a little bit more of sort of prescriptive or descriptive zoning regulations. I think everybody is sort of, looking at what's happened since that plan came out with Task Corners and the area around that, Finney Crossing, et cetera, and saying, hey, this looks pretty good, except. And I'm sure everybody knows what the exceptions are, right? I don't think anybody expected a 4-story hotel to pop up on a little wedge of land shoved between a UPS store and another spot, right? I think that there are things that are, if you will, unexpected to come out of any plan like this. And each time you make a revision, you have to think very carefully about how is this going to get interpreted 5 years from now, 10 years from now? What is this going to allow? What is it not going to allow? And so I'm really interested in gathering that feedback. So overall for me, what I like about the plan is it takes an eye both towards development is going to happen and that we should be mindful of where it happens. We should try to have different types of development in different parts of the town, not just sort of a libertarianish mindset of anybody build whatever you want anywhere, which I think helps create a town that feels like it has some central thought to it, right? It feels organized and pleasant to visit, pleasant to live in. And I think that's great, having the defined zoning, all of that. I think, on the other side of the plan, I think I touched on what doesn't work in the plan, which is, just the structure of some of the buildings and developments that have been proposed or are in progress right now that maybe there's been a lot of negative feedback on. So I'm interested in just trying to figure out how to take that feedback and turn it into a plan that the town really feels bought in on.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ruben? Oh, you're muted. You're muted.
Sorry
That's
about
better.
that. Yeah, okay. And since there's three of us, I'm always going to be number two in whichever order you go, right?
No.
Yeah.
So I did. I skimmed through it, and I did not read it, to be honest with you, sentence per sentence. But I think based on my attendance with the previous meetings of this and the Planning Commission as well, I think what I gathered from that is it is a comprehensive plan. It does address the different facets of community building and planning, all towards improving quality of life for a little town of Williston. But it's also a balancing act. The plan has this balancing act between the recognition of progress, but at the same time trying to respect what the town really wants to be based on its core values. If there's only one thing, general comment that I would like to make is that I think that, and this is piggybacking a little bit on what Alex said, is that, sure, every line can be interpreted in multiple ways. And one way by which we could minimize that is to make sure that we prevent ambiguity of terms where it's not open to any interpretation. Like, for example, the open space, for example. What is an open space and how do we define an open space? So I think there's certain language or terminologies within the plan that could benefit from not only a review, but making them clear and as less to interpretation as possible.
Thank you. Nira?
Hey. The original question, I want to make sure I answer it. Could you just repeat it? Because it was basically looking at what we like about the town plan, if we've, read it, and what we can improve upon within the town plan. I just want to make sure that was the original ask.
Yes, that's a good summary of my question.
Okay, you can tell me if there's more, but to start, I did go through the town plan, and I was really just trying to get kind of a comprehensive overview of what the town plan encompassed. And what I really liked about the town plan is that we are thinking towards more of a sustainable future and what our development is going to look like with the world in the place that it is right now environmentally. So I really like that a lot. I think we could do more from the environmental aspect about how we're going to ensure that as we're developing that we are keeping in mind, how we're spending energy and how we're using renewable energy. I think the other piece that I think would be beneficial that we included in the town plan was also how we're engaging community feedback. So I know a plan is only as good and planning is only as good as the feedback we get from our community members. So I would love to, within our town plan, also understand how we're proactively kind of identifying issues that community members are seeing or areas where there are gaps that they want filled, and kind of taking that feedback, processing it, and then proactively trying to update the town plan so that is taking into consideration that feedback, before it becomes an issue. So really about that proactive planning and that kind of community engagement about getting buy-in from our community members on what they think from all different perspectives and all different parts of the town.
Okay.
And I think that hit all the parts, but.
Thanks. Jeff, follow up?
Sure. All three of you, I think, to a degree, have brought up Taft's Corners, the Taft's Corners areas. And, what I hear about Taft's Corners tends to be either negative or neutral. Rarely do I hear somebody say, hey, I really love Taft's Corners. And so I guess my question is along the lines of, and again, not again, but I realize this is a difficult question, but it's along the lines of what can or should Williston do about Taft's Corners? I'm going to throw into that. We are taking a pretty bold and active step by moving towards form-based code. So if you want to work with that a little bit in your answer, feel free. Does that question, first of all, make sense? Am I rambling too much again?
We'll find out.
We'll find out. Okay, good answer.
Ruben, we'll put you on first.
Oh, thanks, Terry. Hang on, I'm trying to think about, So Jeff, if I could just rephrase the question, you're asking if what are our thoughts in terms of how do we address that issue of, say, and given Taft Corners as an example?
Answer it in whatever way. I'm not trying to confine you too much. I guess a way to think of it is some people look at Taft's Corners and look at it as kind of a failure, for lack of better words. We're doomed to Taft's Corners, for, maybe ever. Other people are going to look at it and say, hey, it still is an opportunity out there.
Mm-hmm.
How do you, so it's kind of along those lines that if that helps at all.
Yeah, it does. And certainly it is a struggle, that finding that balance. And I think I've alluded to it earlier on, to find the balance between progress and environment and quality of life is certainly going to be an eternal battle for sure, because it's part of human evolution, is part of, how we evolve as a community. I came from a big city, so I have seen the big urban, and I lived in New York City, and you can see that New York City is an extreme example compared to Williston. But I think that I see it as an opportunity to be able to engage the community in determining what happens to their community, what happens to their town. And it's finding that balance, and goodness, it's very hard to find that balance between, you want convenience of the Taft Corners, for example, because it's a place where you can eat and socialize and shop. But at the same time, and it's a designated zone for that, but at the same time, you have to have this residential high quality of life feel that should be there as part of the town. So I think the bottom line for me is that to be able to address this fine balance is a difficult task. And I think I'm going to go back to what Neera was saying, something about engaging the community to then participate and be an active participant to the decision making that's affecting their town. But I'm sorry to say that it's just that finding that balance would be very, very, unless we're looking at specific metrics of urban development. And I'm not an urban developer by any means, but I'm sort of just guessing here what I think is the challenge more than anything.
Yeah, good. Thank you.
Alex?
Sure. So, Jeff, to address the latter part of the question head on, I think it's a great move that you guys are moving towards the forms-based, sort of more descriptive zoning policy. I would be interested to know what negative comments you're hearing about task corners, right? I think I was probably the most neutral on the call about it in mentioning it. And that, yeah, it is an opportunity, right? There are some great things about it. It provides us with a walkable zone. It provides us with some more affordable housing, which can be difficult as, a community sort of, to some extent, Williston has developed a bit of a bedroom community mentality around Burlington. The houses are getting more expensive, and you can see house prices everywhere from Brennan Woods and Southridge and the other side of the highway moving up and up and up. So Task Corners has some real value to Williston in terms of a commercial space, as Ruben mentioned. It has value in terms of providing like a center, if you will, of that type of development, and so that it doesn't sprawl across the town and we don't just become sort of one giant strip mall, right? Which is always a risk when dealing with rural communities. I grew up in New Jersey in a very rural community, and it is one giant strip mall now, just one after another. So I've seen it at failure. I've lived in Seattle, I've lived in LA, I've lived in New York, I've lived in San Juan, Puerto Rico, I've lived a lot of places, and none of them have quite the beauty and character that Vermont has. And I think that's the thing that people lament. I think they look at Task Corner and they're like, this doesn't, could feel like you could pick it up and you drop it down in Connecticut and nobody would know the difference. They wouldn't know it was from Vermont. And I think that's where it gets really interesting, right? What we're trying to do is strike a plan. I think Ruben used a really good word, in balance. But I don't think it's just between sort of quality of life and stuff. I think it's about maintaining something that is uniquely Vermont and maintaining something that is uniquely Williston. We're not trying to become the next Church Street, right? We're not going to try to replicate that experience here in Williston because that's Church Street's already Church Street, right? And we don't want the problems that come along with that. And everybody's, been on Church Street and seen the Howard Center clientele wander in the streets and felt that way, right? So, is it great to have a walkable town center? Absolutely. Is it great to have affordable housing? Absolutely. In fact, we need a little bit more of that, right? It's good to have a variety of population because of that, diversity, all of that's excellent. I do think if we had been better about the prescriptive guidance, types and designs of buildings, heights of buildings, the setback requirements, distance between, et cetera, there was an opportunity to shape something that I think could have achieved all of those goals and possibly been still uniquely Williston and still sort of captured the beauty of Vermont, not felt maybe as congested, I think is probably one of the things I hear about it, the traffic and, cars everywhere, and it just doesn't feel like Vermont. But I am interested, what are you hearing, Jeff? What are you hearing, Terry? Like, what are your constituents telling you they don't like about Task Corners specifically?
Maybe we should let the answer go first, and then we feel like we have time. But I'd be happy or offline talk to you about that.
Understood.
Mira?
Thank you. I think there is a great deal of opportunity with Task Corners and Finley Crossing. I myself run my loop through Finley Crossing very frequently, and I think there's a great opportunity in providing various types of housing to people so that it's a mix, and we're offering different types of housing. I think there's a great opportunity in how we've set up for things to be pedestrian friendly and biking friendly, and I think we are still able to manage traffic and congestion and can still move towards the vision of we want a thriving community, we want to bring business in, but we also want to keep that rustic feel of Williston and preserve conservation as well as the history and character of Williston. So while a lot has happened, I think there's just more opportunity with planning to continue to strive towards the vision and values that we have in the town.
Great, thank you.
Nice. Anything further, Jeff?
Well, let's first find out if either you or Gordon, then I'll ask that final question that I get to ask.
Gordon?
Yeah, this question's for all three of you, and if you could just keep it, I guess, brief and to the point.
You've gone, Gordon. We can't hear you. You're frozen up, Gordon.
Ooh.
Gordon, you're frozen up. Try again.
Of course, when it's my turn, the internet is unstable. You know how that works. Well,
We planned it that way, Gordon.
Of course we did, Jeff. It's for all three of you. All of you clearly have an individual leadership skill set in your current professions.
Ooh.
Yeah, we've lost you again.
Yeah. Maybe he could type it.
Chat.
Yeah. This wouldn't happen in Taft's Corners, by the way, everyone. Gordon doesn't live in Taft's Corners.
I live in the rural part, and I love it.
You're back.
Did you get any of it?
No.
So,
All right, I'll try one more time, and I can type the question in a minute if it doesn't go through the third time. I'm looking, you all have clearly good individual leadership skill sets in your current profession. What qualities do you possess that would make you a team player on the Planning Commission?
Start with Nero.
But really brief, I think we're going to hear a lot of opinions. And the most important thing is, of all the opinions we hear, I want everyone to feel heard and respected. So I think those would be the two things that I would bring to the table out of all my leadership skills.
Thank you.
Thanks. Alex?
Sure. Leadership's important in a role like mine, but so is listening, right? At the end of the day, I have to keep a lot of employees, constituents, got hundreds of thousands of customers, do hundreds of millions of dollars a year in revenue. I have to keep them happy, right? You learn to listen a lot in a role like that. And that's best I can say.
Ruben?
So from my side, I work with people from different backgrounds and diverse professional backgrounds in the college. So I am in a healthcare team that I had to also work with other healthcare providers other than myself to better patient outcomes. And I think that having those sort of skills in a much less scale, I guess, would be helpful in terms of just being able to listen and respect where everyone's coming from, different perspectives. But at the end of the day, I think everyone has the same common goal, and that's what it's all about.
Right. Thank you.
I have just one question for all three as well. Then I'll go back to Jeff, and that is: have any of you met with staff either in person or on the phone in the planning division? And secondly, do you have the time to put into the position if you were selected?
Yeah.
So start with Alex.
Sure. I nominated myself yesterday, so unfortunately I haven't been able to schedule that time yet. I just saw that the vacancy was open again after a couple of years ago when corresponding on the last one with Eric. But I definitely plan to. I think I mentioned to him in an email about an hour ago that I'd like to get that set up regardless of what happens here. But I definitely do think I have the time. I'm relatively privileged to have the time to commit to volunteering to this kind of stuff. I'm on the board of the American Red Cross here in Vermont as well. Okay. So, I've got a lot of free time. That much I'm not worried about.
Nira?
Yes, I think one of the biggest things that's important to me in considering applying for this position was the amount of time it would take to review packets from staff, do the research, ask questions in preparation of discussions. So I certainly have the time to prepare for the meetings as well as attend the meetings. And I haven't met with any of the staff. I certainly thought about trying to schedule some time between Friday and today, but I wanted to be respectful of everyone's time on a short notice. And I did go through several of the Planning Commission agendas, meetings, and reviewed the upcoming projects for the year.
Okay.
And fine, thank you. And Ruben?
Yeah, so to answer your second question, Terry, so yes, to the time question. And then just quickly, I have not specifically for this particular purpose, although I have had interactions with the different folks over in the town office for whether it be related to planning commission or any other development board meetings.
Good.
Good, thanks. Jeff, your question?
Yeah, so this is a question that for some reason has over time fallen on my shoulders. Don't mind asking it. We ask it of all applicants for all positions on commissions, and it's a conflict of interest question. And the question is how would you recognize or if there is a conflict of interest, and what would you do about it?
We'll start with Nira.
If there was a conflict of interest, I would immediately speak up and notify the entire committee and staff that I have a conflict of interest. And not only personally, but also if anyone wanted to speak about anything we would be discussing at the upcoming planning commission meetings. Outside of those meetings, I would just respectfully tell them I can't discuss this at this time, but I am more than happy to discuss it at the planning commission meeting when we're all together in a public space.
Okay.
Ruben?
Short answer, I will declare them. I will need to declare them and recuse myself from any conversations that would influence the decision at the end.
And Alex?
I mean, similar to Ruben, obviously, if anything that smells even slightly like a conflict of interest, you declare immediately, right? That's transparency, I think, is key immediately, and you recuse yourself. You did ask a question I don't think everybody answered, Jeff, which is that how do you know when you have a conflict of interest? And I try to go by the smell test, or what we sometimes call the New York Times test, right? If you just put this in 5 or 6 words at the headline of a paper, how bad would it sound? If it can sound at all bad, don't do it.
Okay, good. I had not heard of that standard, but I kind of like it. Okay.
Thank all three of you for being here for the interviews. And as I said, we'll be addressing the possibility of appointing somebody later on tonight. Williston has a wealth of talent, as seen here tonight with all three of you. It's going to be a difficult decision for us, but that's why we get the big bucks. So
I would just add that I agree. I don't like having to make these decisions. It's probably my least favorite part of being on the select board. I would be happy to appoint all three of you. We just can't.
keep in mind, though, because two of you will not be appointed, if there's something else that comes along in the town that you wish to do, by all means apply for it. So thanks again.
Thanks for having us.
We currently have an opening for the Regional Planning Commission, which deals with countywide planning work. I'm just serving in that seat in the interim here. So certainly, if that's an interest to anyone who is not appointed, please follow up with me. We can chat more.
Good.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks again.
Thank you all.
So let's move on. Is Melinda on the list?
Yep, I'll get Melinda connected here.
So a townwide trail assessment update, and Melinda has written a memo to us and given us some things to look at as well, as far as a sort of a slide presentation. So Melinda, when you're ready, we are.
I think you're connecting, Melinda. If you can just share your video and unmute here. Here we go.
There she is. You can see you, Melinda. You're muted, however. There you go.
Hi. Is it possible for me to share my screen? Yeah, okay.
Yep. I think I clicked that.
All right. So thanks for allowing me to take up some of your time here. I just wanted to tell you about a trail assessment that we had done this summer. So as you know, the town has an extensive network of trails, 12 miles or so that the town maintains, or actually rather 9 or 10 that the town maintains, and 20 now maintained by the Catamount Outdoor Family Center, 20 miles, and an additional like 2.5 miles maintained by the Fellowship of the Wheel at Mud Pond Country Park. The Conservation Commission is charged with the planning, development, and maintenance of the trail system, and they take that responsibility very seriously. The town plan has stated goals related to the maintenance and the expansion of trails and country parks. And the trail network has been gradually expanding over the years. And there's been a lot of interest expressed by citizens and local advocacy groups to develop new trails. At the same time, the town's experiencing some growing pains related to the maintenance of its trails. And standards have changed somewhat from 20 years ago, and expectations are higher, I would say, in terms of trail maintenance. So all that being said, it seemed wise to take a look at what the town has and assess the condition of the network, figure out how much it costs to maintain the existing trail system before any further expansion happens. So this year has been unusual, to say the least. What has come to light during the pandemic is how important the trails and parks are. In fact, walking in a natural area is one of the few relatively safe activities that people can do during a pandemic. And it also has the effect of just keeping people grounded and centered. And it's beneficial for both physical and mental well-being. So as a result, people have been flocking to trails. Lots of new people have been getting outdoors. And most importantly, people are placing a much greater value on access to parks, recreation, and the outdoors. On April 6th of this year, I took this picture at the 5 Tree Hill parking lot, just showing cars all up and down the road, and the parking lot's full. So that just gives you an idea. Statewide, the trail usage is up considerably, and also here in Williston, I have noticed that. So the town hired a consulting firm called SE Group to conduct a trail assessment and develop a capital improvement plan. We developed an application. I worked with the SE Group staff to develop an application that can be used on a phone as you walk the trail to digitally collect information about the trails. And it's a very efficient way to collect information. You can take photos, you can geolocate all the information. So we took some general trail information, information about the trailheads, parking and signage, more detailed information about the trail tread conditions, like whether there were steep sections, whether there were tread issues like muddy spots, erosion, etc. The condition of the corridor, whether there were blowdowns, whether there was mowing that needed to happen, and also documented every single structure along every every trail that we surveyed, including bridges, punch-in, stone steps, water bars, signage, et cetera, to really create a very detailed picture of the current state of the trail. And also documented the conditions of every single structure. So what resulted was this database, a detailed matrix that includes every single structure, the structure's condition, detailed comments, as well as any issues like tread issues or anything that needed to be addressed. And also resulted in a trail assessment log for each trail with information about all of that stuff, including photographs. And also an ability to map all these points, which is really important if you're going to have people going out to do these repairs. It'd be most efficient for them to carry a map and know where they're going to go. And then this is just a general maintenance schedule, just more information about when monitoring needs to happen. Just kind of, this is what you should do every year, when you should monitor and when you should, what you should inspect and when. And then finally, for each trail, a summary of the number of each structures by structure type and their condition and whether they need to be replaced in the short term, the medium term, or the long term, and most importantly, how much it's going to cost. So for each trail, we had a summary table like that. And then this table just gives you information on how costs were arrived at. And, there's a low and a high cost for each type of structure. And then, so finally, just a summary of information that was collected. The total mileage that was assessed was a little over 7. The total number of structures, 111 structures, including punch-in, drainage structures, boardwalks, bridges, benches, etc. And then this gives you the breakdown of structures by trail. And then there's a total of 38 signs throughout the network. And then finally, there is a summary of costs for each trail. And if if we want to maintain a top-notch trail system and do everything that is recommended in this trail assessment, it would cost in total a little over $1 million. And if we were to do this over a 20-year horizon, it would take about $50,000 a year. So, so what I would recommend, this is just to give you something to consider as we approach budgeting season, because I am going to recommend a few capital improvement projects based on this information from the assessment. But knowing that we're going to be short on funds, we won't have enough money to do everything we want to do here. This timeline could be stretched out, and we could probably leverage volunteers for some of the work, but this just kind of gives you an idea of how much it costs to maintain a trail system like this. And as maintenance gets, the longer you defer maintenance, the more the costs keep adding up. So I think that's that's all I want to say. And I guess, I think we understand that there is value in this trail system, that it's important and there is value in it. It would probably be a good idea to get a better idea of, and a better understanding of usage. And so it might, I'd recommend either, putting trail counters out and getting some information about usage that way, or getting people to do manual trail user surveys to get a better sense of the level of usage. Anyway, I think now that's all I have. So if anybody has questions.
Thank you, Melinda. Yes, the leading question is, what's a punch-in?
Yeah. I wish I had a picture, but it's basically a type of wooden structure that you walk on over a wet area, which also leads to the other point of, this is a lot of money you see here. And one of the reasons why this network is so expensive to maintain is, I think, back in the day, people weren't as concerned about sustainability of trails, and you wanted to build a trail in a wetland or around a wetland, great. We'll do that. So there's a large portion of the trail network going right around Mud Pond, and most of it's boardwalk. So boardwalk is very expensive. Boardwalk and or punch-in, very expensive to maintain over time. So that's going to be something to consider moving forward, and developing future trails.
And are there, do you know of any grants that might be available over the course of the years that we're considering doing this?
So, unfortunately, the grants that are available are not used for maintenance projects. They're awarded for new trail development and not for maintenance. That may change. I have heard that there may be grants available for maintaining trails. But
thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you. Other questions from the board members?
Hey, Melinda, Jeff here. First, I just wanted to, I was very impressed with the study and the level of detail that went into it. And I guess upon hearing more from your description, how we now have this app, I didn't realize that aspect of it that we can use. That's very impressive, very cool. I don't know how else to put it, so I'll be blunt. I'm in a little bit of sticker shock when it came to the investment that it's suggesting we make in our trails. On the other hand, so there's the sticker shock piece of it. But on the other hand, when we break it down into, well, what does that mean in terms of what we ought to be putting in per year? And I'm looking at 50 to 70K, that's a little bit more manageable. So I guess coming a long way around, my question is right now, do you have a sense of how much we build into our budget for trail maintenance? Ask kind of a different way to phrase it would be, how much do we need to increase it to get to the 50 or to 70K level?
Yeah. So we have been putting much less into trail maintenance, which is probably one reason why we have a lot of deferred maintenance. Right now, it's about $12,000 a year, and that's in the operating budget. And there has been in the last couple of years, I've put something in the capital improvement budget, the replacement of the Allenbrook Boardwalk Bridge, which is going to be about about $65,000 to $80,000. So that's a big ticket item. But that's just really the only capital improvement project that's related to trail maintenance, I believe, that's ever been proposed as capital improvement. So yeah, I mean, I guess I would recommend trying to tackle some of these large maintenance projects as capital improvement items, as the town is able to spend funding on it, and realizing that we're most likely going to be pretty short of funds, but that's kind of what every town is dealing with. So it's nothing new.
Yeah. Okay. Is the concept, or I shouldn't say is the concept, would you, I think I know the answer to this, but I'm still going to ask it as a question. Is it best for the town to make this annual contribution, let's say, somewhere between 50 and 70K a year, and just build that into how we do the budget every year? I mean, we do this for certain things like vehicle, purchasing, these bigger ticket, long-term type issues. I'm not at all suggesting I'm yet in favor or not in favor of it. I'm just trying to figure out if we were to get to this fully funding the $1 million plus over, let's say, a 20-year horizon, is that the best way to have sufficient funds to do that with minimal, realizing there is an impact, but with the least impact on the tax rate?
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Certainly, just approach it like you would any capital project, and just try to budget for it over the long term.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Those are my questions or comments.
Any further questions or comments? I had just one question about the Commons Trail. Does that go just through the development called the Commons, or does that go further?
So that goes from Tower Lane down through Pinecrest Village.
Oh.
Yeah. So, again, that's a trail that basically serves two different developments. And so, it might be, I don't know, it's something to think about. Like, is that really kind of worth the town maintaining a trail through there? I don't know.
Good, thanks.
Yeah.
Other questions or comments? If not, then we'll look forward to seeing you at budget time.
Yeah. Thank you, Melinda.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, Melinda.
So next on our agenda is the Housing Trust Fund. And we do have several people who are going to be joining us for discussion. I think Brian Pine, Michael Monty, and Matt Belanger.
Yep. I'm getting them all connected here, Terry, and I can kick this off here. So really thankful to have our guest this evening. Michael Monte is the Chief Operating Officer of the Champlain Housing Trust, and Brian Pine is Burlington's former Housing Director. He helped create and administer Burlington's Housing Trust Fund over a number of years. So this has been a policy item we've had on our list to tackle here for a bit. The board may recall back in 2013, the Affordable Housing Task Force final report, one of the recommendations was looking at establishing a housing trust fund in Williston. The town has allocated funds in recent budget years, some seed money. There's about $15,000 there at the present time. But I thought this evening for the board, with our guests this evening, to kind of learn more about what a housing trust fund is, how it can function, some governance elements, administrative, programmatic, and revenue. So it'll kind of walk you through these kind of high level policy items, and then I'll come up for direction from the board as we move ahead here with some other options in this. Michael and Brian, thanks a lot for joining us this evening.
Thanks very much. And I think I got the initial invitation from Eric, and he asked me if I could come and speak to you about the Housing Trust Fund. And I immediately thought, sure, I can, but I think there's probably somebody better who could do it, and that's Brian Pine. Brian has been the administrator for that trust fund for 19 plus years or something, 17 plus years, and knows the intricacies of how Burlington's Housing Trust Fund has worked. I worked for the city of Burlington for about 19 years, and probably slightly different than Brian. I am a recipient of the Housing Trust Funds a bit more than he has been for the last 12 years as Chief Operating Officer of the Champlain Housing Trust. I could tell you how, if you were to establish a housing trust fund, how we would use your money and to do good works in the town. But again, it's been a valuable sort of fund and resource for the city of Burlington. I know that Brian can probably talk to the hundreds of units that have been created in Burlington as a result of its use, the leverage that it's brought about, and all of that. But I'll let Brian just kick it off and give you a little bit more detail and history. Brian, is that good?
Sure. Yep. I'm often on the other end of this type of Zoom meeting because I serve on the Burlington City Council, but you all can hear just fine.
We can.
Thumbs up. Great. Excellent. So the Housing Trust Fund came about due to essentially a citizen-driven process in the late 1980s. It was 1989. It was a vote of the people of Burlington in the election of 1989, March of 1989, that decided that a penny for affordable housing was an investment worth making. And I think it's worth noting that that vote really came after a bit of a heyday in terms of investments in affordable housing, both in the bricks and mortar and also in the organization, sort of the delivery system, if you will, that was built up during the early days of the city's Community and Economic Development Office. And so it was sort of a natural progression to then go to the voters and essentially say, we believe this is a cause worthy of your support. Would you agree to tax yourselves in order to fund it? So as much as I know as a local elected official, and you all know, asking people to raise their own property taxes is something that you try to find other ways to raise revenues other than that method. But we decided that it was worth going to the voters, and the posters that circulated around the city literally had a picture of Abe Lincoln and a penny, essentially saying, isn't it worth a penny on the tax rate to support affordable homes for working people in our community? So it didn't win overwhelmingly. It was actually quite a close margin that it was victorious, but we won it. Over time, the value of that penny has unfortunately eroded substantially because of what you all may be familiar with, the revenue neutrality requirement that certain funds over time need to remain relatively neutral even as the grand list grows in value. So our charter requires that you essentially adjust down the rate on different designated funds rather than see it grow over time. So that is something that has led to the trust fund not keeping up with inflation. And we did fix that in this past March election, but due to COVID, we have not enacted that change because we tried to minimize tax increases at the local level. So that was sort of I guess you could call it almost an austerity measure at the local level to not go forward with it this year. But at its height, the trust fund in 2019 or 2020 was generating about $360,000 was the annual allocation. And that was a combination of both that penny, the dedicated penny, but also even with its eroded value, but also essentially the mayor and the council deciding that we would augment that penny to bring it up, or that funding amount to bring it up to this funding level. I think this year we're going to see it closer to about 230 or 240,000. So it's taking quite a hit due to COVID, but that's the reality that we're facing because of decreased revenues in other areas. So broadly speaking, though, the trust fund in Burlington was established really to provide a local source of dollars to organizations, primarily to nonprofit organizations. And the reason why is because the premise of the trust fund is that if we're going to invest scarce public dollars, we ought to invest in permanently affordable homes and apartments, not provide incentives to private developers, because those inherently have pressure to then convert those back to market rate down the road. And so that scarce public dollar isn't preserved and isn't conserved over time. And in fact, we lose the value of that dollar over time. So the whole premise that was advocated when the trust was created, it's written right into the ordinance in our code of ordinances, is that perpetual affordability is the priority for funding, and it always has been under all the mayors that have served. The trust fund has not changed that focus. So that is a bedrock principle of at least this housing trust fund in Burlington. We essentially created rules and regulations based on the ordinance that was developed, and in doing so, set up an allocation process, which I can describe really in kind of high level is 50% of the annual allocation, no less than 50%. It can be more, but no less than 50% must go to the bricks and mortar creation of affordable housing or preservation of existence. So it does have to go into actual, project costs. 35%, no more than 35%. So that's a maximum on that, can go to what we call capacity grants to support sort of the operating costs of the organizations that the city believes need our support. Champlain Housing Trust has been a recipient, Home Share Vermont, at different times Cathedral Square, the Committee on Temporary Shelter receives some support from that source, and so on. So that is what we call capacity funding. And again, that's limited to 35%. And then there's an admin fee of 15%, no more than 15% is used to actually administer the housing trust fund. So that goes to the staff person, or essentially to cover the portion of the staff person's time in the Community and Economic Development Office. So that's essentially at a high level. Some of the accomplishments that I'd just highlight for a minute is that when it was last evaluated, the trust fund's leverage ratio was, I think, $11 to every $1 that was invested from the trust fund was leveraged in other dollars. So it's a pretty significant return on investment. So it's an ROI that any public program would be, proud to be talking about. And I think I should mention that the governance, the allocation is handled by a very small, a very lean committee of 3 people. And the committee consists of the director of the Community and Economic Development Office. This is by resolution of the council when this was established. So the director automatically gets a seat. The chair of the city council Community Development Committee, which I happen to serve in that capacity now, but it's been many other people over the 30 years of the trust's history. And the mayor appoints an additional person, which is often either a city attorney or a member of the mayor's staff gets appointed to fill that 3rd seat. So that allows for pretty, responsive, nimble process. We try to be a funnel and not a filter. So that was one of my mottos, is make it easy for them, because they have all this other money from the state and federal government that has gazillions of hoops and strings attached, and we ought to offer something that is not so cumbersome and bureaucratic. It ought to be much more user-friendly, and so that was our focus. The other piece I just want to mention is often the amount that is granted is quite small, so it may be $10,000, but that $10,000 would allow an organization to essentially purchase an option or enter into a purchase and sale agreement on a much bigger transaction. But without that 10 grand of risk capital, because that is risk capital, the project would never have gone forward. So think of the trust fund as that little piece that is often essential to making a project feasible, especially in the early stages when no other funder is willing to take any risks. That's the way we've primarily viewed the trust fund, as it's a very small but a very significant contribution to an affordable housing project in terms of the funding and financing that's put together. And we don't recapture the dollars because we've, again, addressed that by allocating it to the organizations that are in the business of providing affordable housing. Means that you don't have to then monitor carefully everything that is done after the fact and go about recapturing dollars for projects which are converted to market rate housing rather than affordable housing. So that's another advantage of taking that perpetual affordable approach. I'm looking at my list on another screen here just to make sure I've hit everything. And I think I'll just stop there and let you all ask us questions.
I can give you one real quick example of how we used it that I thought it was a shining example of it. We owned a property off on Archibald Street in Burlington in the old North End, and there was a street adjoining that, which was called Bright Street, which had two very large plots, but properties which were really in bad shape. And we really wanted to develop those last two pieces. And so what we did is we bought the two properties. And in buying those two properties, we could afford to do it, and the rents could cover it, some of it, but couldn't really cover it, all of it. And we really gave ourselves a 3-year redevelopment opportunity to sort of take down a couple of those properties and then build essentially 40 apartments there. So it was, I think the trust fund covered some interest cost on the borrowing, because we could borrow the money to buy the properties, but it really wasn't going to work unless we can get the interest cost covered. And so the trust basically helped us with the interest costs for the 3-year period while we redeveloped the parcels. And I think it was like $40,000 or $50,000 or something like that. But that leveraged a $12 million brand new, beautiful, redeveloped apartments and just really cleaned up that whole area in terms of its redevelopment. And that's a good example of how I think in these cases where a town may want to do something, that it can be just bring a little bit of cash, a little bit of money. It's not usually money at the end. Sometimes it could be, but often enough it's money at the beginning to sort of get the water boiling, shall we say, on a real good opportunity. So
thank you.
Yeah.
Matt, talk a little bit about the Williston, where we're at right now and where we might be.
Sure. So just a couple things about Williston's current approach to affordable housing, which generally amounts to some regulatory incentives in our zoning and some regulatory relief from fees related to permitting, including things like our impact fees. What I'd like to highlight, though, is some of the limitations we have. Mr. Pine mentioned the issue of trying to make sure that perpetually affordable housing stays perpetually affordable. That is something Williston continues to struggle with. We incentivize in our zoning and through our growth management system the creation of perpetually affordable housing. And I won't say that we've lost any of those perpetually affordable units off the rolls, but as we've gained a few more of them over the years, managing the enforcement side of that has certainly become a challenge. And by way of example, we had a unit constructed some years ago, constructed for the purpose of renting, with outside monitoring of the rental price by Housing Vermont. The owner of that property decided to convert it to a for sale property. And worked with me to create a deed restriction that would ensure a perpetually affordable sale price on that property. But that did trigger a letter to the town from Housing Vermont saying we, as per our agreement with the town, we are now exercising our option to exit from the enforcement responsibility over the affordability of that unit, leaving it as an element of zoning enforcement, which is a pretty tough way to actually do this stuff. Mm-hmm. Our more recent examples are related to the 9 units that will be created as part of the Northridge subdivision. Those units are for sale. They will be perpetually affordable, price restricted, as perpetually affordable for someone at the 100% median income level. And that's going to happen by way of a deed restriction, which will require an audit and certificate of compliance issued by me, the zoning administrator, whenever those properties change hand. And the affordability calculation is built right into the deed restriction. That's okay when there's maybe 9 of those in town, but if we're achieving our goals and building lots and lots of affordable housing in town, that gets much, much trickier. If you were looking at some of the examples that Eric provided, Charlotte in particular, and some others, you'll note that most of them also, when they're looking at affordable housing, they're looking at an income qualification for the person who's purchasing or renting that housing. That is not something Williston does in its current incentive system. And frankly, it's beyond our capacity to do that via zoning administration. So as the developer told me about the affordable units in Northridge, Bill Gates could buy this house. And that's absolutely true. The price at which Bill Gates buys this house and the price at which he resells it someday are what's restricted under our current incentive system, but not the income that Bill Gates makes. And so, for Williston, I think there are all of the possibilities of leveraging more creation of affordable housing with some money via the establishment of a local trust fund and board to monitor that, but also some ability to handle some of the enforcement and deed restriction work that is right now a little bit, or likely to become a little bit more challenging to do through zoning. That's my really brief comment on that. So, man, if you would like, I don't know if you want me to jump in and I can sort of give you a comment on that. It's up to you guys about.
Sure.
Just so we have 3,000 various units of different kind, just so we know, both apartments and shared equity home ownership. And we have more than a few people who just do compliance. Frankly, that's all they do is comply with laws and rules and regulations, which is kind of crazy when you really think about it. But that's what we have, because we are highly, highly regulated as a business. We are complying with, not only just typical bank compliance rules, but also just all the sources that we have. Including especially low-income housing tax credits. We're actually written in the ordinance in Heinsberg, where when a developer wants to go ahead and do something different, they have to actually come to us, and we consult with the town of Heinsberg and tell them whether they in fact meet the rule. I'm not gonna urge you necessarily to throw us into your ordinance and put us in the ordinance, but what I would say is that both for different towns. But also for different developers, we provide kind of compliance services. When Eric Farrell in South Burlington needs to go ahead and re-rent or to resell anything, we got rules with him and we got agreements with him to essentially do that. We charge a small fee because our compliance is like 6 or 8 pages long. We get it down to a page or so long because from a town perspective, it's usually a little simpler. There's not a lot of federal and state tax codes. It's just a straightforward, doesn't meet the rule of the zoning rule. And we just basically review the basic information that we get on a signature from both the renter or the owner of the property and do that compliance work. So in part, some of the work, when the city of Burlington calls us up because we get a capacity grant and they ask us, would you help us develop a housing program? We say yes. We don't say yes, sir, but we say yes, because in part they give us capacity funds to be able to sort of help with growing those programs. And I think certainly we could do that for Williston, and certainly we could do this from a zoning administration point of view if you wanted to actually do something like that. We sell and buy 40 or 50 homes every year. And so it's a constant, fairly churn. I can tell you that we actually sold more in the last month and a half for some reason than we did than all last year. A lot of activity. So we sort of do this. We do this with deed restrictions. as well as through also land leases. And most of our stuff is now deed restrictions because it's condominiums. We have quite a few of those. So we could certainly do something like that. And just listening to what you're saying, this is, I guess, tied to the trust fund, because if you wanted to really get us involved and make it robust, and we'd like to get paid a little bit. But even on a short term, just small time basis, we could work with a developer. Developers typically will have a fee that gets charged every time they have a turnover anyway, and they could do that and add it to to you or to us to assist us in doing that. So
that's great. I will follow up just by saying that oftentimes when we inform would-be developers that we incentivize the creation of affordable housing, and we really try to incentivize it where the affordability will be managed by a third party. They'll sort of go forth from that conversation and come back and say, oh, well, I looked into that and it's not economically feasible for me to do that, or my project is too small for Housing Vermont or CHT to be interested in. That's the feedback we get, and we would certainly like what the town establishes to smooth that and make that workable for people. I think the other thing that's coming in Williston, as the select board's aware, because I won't stop talking about it, is our land use regulation in the growth center transitioning over hopefully to a form-based code that may allow for some density and some flexibility on projects that may mean that some buildings and some developments that are of a compelling enough size and density to have a bigger partnership going will be feasible within the development code. So that's coming as well. And I'll just close by saying I think it's an opportune time for the town to move forward with thinking about how it's going to use this trust fund and put it to work.
Thank you. So any questions from the board?
Jeff here. Don't know if this is for Mike or Brian. I'd like to hear a little bit more. You made the comment that you don't work with private developers, or primarily you don't work with private developers because of the perpetually affordable aspect of that. I guess, Matt, you had mentioned we have done that in Williston to a degree, but you see issues with it. I don't know how to exactly ask this question. I guess part of it is the answer you don't work with private developers, that you only work with nonprofits whose mission is affordable housing perpetually, or I guess I could use some help trying to figure out that piece of it.
Well, for the trust fund, because the funding it's typical to get 3 times the dollars requested over the dollars that are actually available. So when you have a competitive funding process and you have a private developer who says, I can do this initial 10-year affordability, but beyond that, I don't know that I'm not willing to lock in for this small amount of assistance you're providing. And then you have a nonprofit that says, well, we're going to create 50 units and we're going to go to all the other sources that you have to lock in on affordability anyway. So we have no problem with that. So I think that's its preference, the priority of the dollars going to projects that guarantee perpetual affordability, so that we're not putting a public resource up for essentially creation and then losing it down the road. So that's really what happens here. Yeah.
Okay. So it almost kind of is, if you're ranking, the dollars, where to put them, exactly. The private sector is ending up at the bottom, for lack of better words. Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. Matt, your thoughts? Oh, I'm sorry, Mike.
Yeah. The only thing I would say is that I think that's correct. But in our context, we are constantly working with the private sector in terms of co-development and opportunity. I can't. I think Snyder is doing a lot of the build out right now in the middle of Williston. Yeah. We've got and pretty remarkable, really. Frankly, we've done three buildings with Snyder now. We're doing a 4th probably in Winooski. And we do it with private sector developers all the time, where we're sort of doing a partnership. you get into something where somebody's saying, well, they got this need to create this affordable housing covenant. They want to increase their density. They don't want to mess around with it. And like you said, Matt, I think some of the private guys said, we don't want to talk to CHT because it's too small for them. I don't know if that's always the case. I don't remember getting those phone calls. Maybe it depends upon maybe the frame that they gave it to us on, but I could tell you that I only think I work with private sector guys most of the time in terms of doing development. And I would say that the trust fund itself can in fact be a friend and a leverage for private sector folks. We could look at Cambrian Rise as an example where we went in, which was a requirement for 25% of it being affordable. When we came in and we did that, we leveraged some trust fund monies, we leveraged some other funds from the city and other resources. And that's a 700, 800 homes that is going to be built, of which we're part of that. And I think we do that quite often. So I would hate to get the notion that it's not we're not private sector engaged. I would say we just bought a Snyder built building based upon an agreement that we established. We established the agreement. We established a framework. We actually did the development agreement with the city of St. Albans. So in downtown St. Albans, we just essentially bought out a turnkey operation from Snyder. I think it's 32 apartments, and they built it under our supervision, our rules, our needs. And I think if you asked him and asked others, we'd work all the time together, pretty regularly. So just want to put that out there, just so you all.
And my next question has to do with the 15% admin aspect of Burlington. I understand why the city, let's say, would want to do that. My question is along the lines of how detrimental is that in terms of not having money that you can use either for capacity or bricks and mortar?
I think it's probably appreciated by the organizations that receive the capacity and project funding, knowing that they have adequate staff capacity within the city to manage and administer the funding. So I think there's a pretty good trade-off there. And it's also it's a great question though, because there's a number of other provisions in the city code of ordinances that dovetail into the Housing Trust Fund, so that the time spent working with developers who are required to provide affordable units and they get a density bonus through the inclusionary housing program, there's a piece of that is covered by this 15% housing trust fund, because it feeds into the ordinance feeds into the housing trust fund is related very much to the inclusionary housing ordinance. So
the staff person that's paid for the housing trust fund basically provides the expertise to the planning, the DRB around the requirements of the zoning around affordable housing. So it's instead of the zoning administrator or zoning staff needing to know that, they go to the housing trust fund staff and say, doesn't meet the rule.
Yeah. And as Matt said earlier, the affordability, the price is one thing that's affordable too. In order to ensure the occupied by someone who meets this income level, you need someone to do that. That's what that 15% also pays for.
Any further questions from the board?
One other, if you don't mind, is the 1 cent on the property tax the only source of revenue for the cities?
It has been, the majority of the funding has been from that, but then there's there's a couple of ways. Very rarely, we have a thing called a condominium conversion ordinance. And there were some condominiums that converted from rental housing to condominiums. And the city decided in the 1980s that was a threat that was going to displace low-income people. And so rather than just allow it to happen, there was a condominium conversion fee, basically, that was the first reference in city ordinance was in 1987 to take this condo fee and put it into the housing trust fund before we even had established a housing trust fund, it was already mentioned in another ordinance elsewhere. So that was the first way. And then if there's a housing conversion or demolition or replacement that occurs, so some entity buys a building and knocks it down and turns it into a parking lot, or maybe they convert an old house to an office. In Burlington, you actually have to pay a housing replacement fee. Those dollars go to the housing trust fund. That's a small amount, but it's some years it's as much as 40 or 50,000 come from that. And then lastly, we've had a few instances, and there will be more, I think, because we changed the inclusionary housing ordinance, that a developer that has a small enough project will be able to, rather than create the affordable units on site, they will be able to contribute to the housing trust fund as a payment in lieu, basically. And that is another source that we expect. That has not really begun to kick in due to COVID, but we think it will have some effect.
Okay. Does Burlington have inclusionary zoning?
We do, and it was adopted in 1990. So we're the first community in Vermont that adopted that. Yeah.
Okay, good. Thank you.
So I think we're at the point where we're trying to learn how to walk before we can run in this subject. And sounds like I believe there's interest on the board. We're a little short-handed tonight with 2 people absent. I believe they'll be interested on the board to proceed cautiously and slowly on this. But thank you very much for coming to our meeting tonight and sharing your information.
You're welcome. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, no, thank you. It was very helpful.
Thanks.
Thanks, both of you.
Yeah.
You bet. Have a good night.
Thank you.
You too.
So, Matt, you're going to stay with us, and we're going to talk about retail cannabis marketplace legislation that's passed, and is Williston going to pot? So you have given us a memo and some information from VLCT, and perhaps you could take us from there.
Sure. So what we're now, oops, sorry, I'm in my housing memo still. Hold on. Can talk to you about accessory dwelling units and affordable housing that way. But that's for perhaps another time. So what we have in front of us is a act now, not just a bill, approving the creation of a retail cannabis marketplace in Vermont. And the select board, I think, faced with a little bit of possibly a challenge related to this. And in very short summary of the memo I wrote, the first part to understand is that for there to be retail sale allowed in your town, there would need to be a vote by Australian ballot held at a regular or special town meeting. And Eric, you can correct me if I'm leaving out some details here, but as I understand it, the 2 ways in which that Australian ballot would happen would either be that the select board would put the ballot item on the warrant, or it would happen by petition of 5% of the registered voters in town.
Yeah, I was looking at that 5% question. Matt, I didn't get an answer on that quite yet, but it's something we're keeping on our radar here, and I can let the board know once we have a definitive answer.
Right, and the possibility is, as a COVID response, the rules might be actually relaxed on the 5% threshold for the March town meeting, as I understand it. Is that right?
Yeah, still nothing definitive there.
Okay, so some number of citizens, right? So some number of citizens might end up getting this on the ballot, regardless of the interest of the select board, one way or the other. In terms of local revenue that would happen from retail cannabis, it's just limited to the usual 1% sales tax, like anything else. So there's no big revenue picture for towns who choose to opt in versus those who don't. And the enabling legislation for this, first off, provides towns with no ability to have a say over the placement of growing or processing or warehousing, packaging, manufacturing facilities in town, does require the opt-in vote for the retailing. And then goes on to say that retailing will may not be regulated by any sort of town ordinance, would be licensed by a local cannabis control board, very similar to when the select board convenes itself as a liquor control board, and that retailing could be regulated for its compliance with zoning. So I've given a version of this speech before, probably a year and a half ago, to the select board. In our current zoning, retail is retail. It can happen anywhere that retail happens, absent any particular additional zoning standards that are unique to retail cannabis being adopted into the bylaw. So that's something I think for the select board members to think about, but don't take too long to think about it. If you would like the town to start imagining any sort of enhanced zoning rules around retail cannabis, now's the time to start thinking about that, and think about that bylaw amendment and what it might look like. I provided a link in my memo to a CCRPC document talking about some ways that municipalities can address tobacco retailing and use through zoning. I think there's quite a bit of parallels there. There are some things in the public health world that tend to have an impact when you're talking about the sale of controlled substances, regulations on outlet density or spacing. So rules that say you can have a retailer, but you can't have a retailer within 1,000 or 2,000 feet of another retailer, or the boundary of a school or child care center or place where young people congregate, things like that. So those are generally thought of as pretty reasonable tools in zoning. They're not ones that we use very broadly in Williston's scheme right now. They probably are ones that, if adopted into zoning, would hold up. But I do have to put a really big asterisk on that right now, because a lot is going to change once the state establishes its cannabis control board and advisory committee and engages in the rulemaking process. And as we know from some of our experiences where zoning touches, for example, on state wastewater rules and septic systems, quite a bit of that fine edge between what towns can do and what the state says towns cannot do will actually probably be established in the rulemaking. And at the end of the day, that's a 3-member committee that will be deciding those things, along with a staff attorney and a staff secretary. So couple of question marks there, but it's a good time to start thinking about if there is a desire to say that cannabis retailers would be regulated in a way differently from other types of retailers in town under zoning. Now's the time to start thinking about that. I can sort of stand by to answer some more detailed questions about it. And I would say that, with most things like this, as a select board, you might be saying, well, we don't have to worry about the zoning until we decide whether we want this or not. But that may not be the case for this one. You may find yourselves, with an affirmative vote as soon as March, and then not a lot of time to alter those bylaws.
So Matt, could I rephrase what I just heard to make sure I understood it correctly? You it may be lukewarm, but you are, I think you're recommending that we proactively deal with the question of, if retail sale of cannabis is allowed in Williston for whatever reason it gets here, we ought to have zoning in place regulating where those retail establishments can be located.
If you would like to restrict those locations more than you do the retailing of socks, or pick your consumer good.
Yeah.
in the case of when this came before the board, in the case of dispensaries, the decision was made to sort of shove dispensaries off to the edge of town and only allow them in the industrial district. If there was interest from the select board on addressing similar use or geographic restrictions for retail cannabis, I'd actually recommend something opposite for this. I would recommend that it be allowed in the retail core of town rather than pushing it off to a part of town that is quite depopulated in the evenings, where sometimes road frontage and visibility is high and rent is cheap. And having recently been on a drive through Maine as their retail market kicks up and as their medical market has kind of exploded, you sort of see these things pop up on the edge of town in these semi-abandoned industrial buildings that are kind of at the end of their lifespan. I actually think from a land use perspective, it's better to say, put it right in the middle of the town where it's integrated with other things and where there's eyes on the street and, where it's not likely to become a street full of sort of folks who all want to try to get in on this on the cheap.
Okay.
So, might think about which of the districts that allow retailing would you see this working better or worse? And then also, like I said, things like outlet density. Do you want to avoid having a large concentration of the same sort of thing in one place?
Okay. From what I read of your memo, I mean, it sounds like we have quite a bit of latitude of deciding which areas retail of cannabis, sale of cannabis would be allowed. I mean,
I think so. I think that's pretty clear that, choosing which zoning districts at least, if not establishing an overlay, would be seen as acceptable.
Yeah. I like the idea of being proactive. We don't know we don't know if there's going to be a vote. We don't know how the vote would go. To be honest with you, I may not be as apprehensive about the sale of cannabis as others might be, just to sort of forewarn you about where I might be coming from. Mm-hmm. I would note we sell plenty of dangerous substances already in Williston. Hard alcohol, tobacco is mentioned. We have plenty of pharmacies that sells, highly regulated, and we don't have concerns about those. If cannabis is appropriately regulated, I guess either by the town to a minimal degree, but by the state, those concerns can be dissipated from my standpoint. So that just lets you know at where I stand at the moment. This is I'm still on the learning curve here.
Yes, I would say drawing not so much chemically speaking, but land use speaking, drawing a parallel to the CBD market. One thing we don't have a lot of built environment around this, but one thing we experienced in the office is there was a wave about a year ago when it just seemed like everybody was ready to make their millions as some sort of a CBD products manufacturer and retailer. And we had a lot of first-time, undercapitalized, would-be CBD retailers shopping around for those sort of high-visibility, inexpensive spots in Williston, places where there's not a lot of foot traffic, but there's a lot of vehicle traffic, properties that you might rather see just go ahead and redevelop at this point rather than continue to be leased up for something. And places where that retailer would really end up being kind of out on their own. And we also got a lot of kind of oddball proposals where somebody would say, well, really, I'm a warehouse. Everything behind my counter is a warehouse. I sell most of this stuff online, but I sure do want that big neon sign out front in the parking lot. And rather than deal with that or deal with folks who are trying to get creative around the idea of accessory sales or, yeah, sure, I'll call myself a warehouse if you'll let me locate here. I think there's a lot to be said for if you are going to take on applicants who want to do this, they're ones who are capable of doing it in that sort of, careful, controlled way. And I do think that at least your alcohol retailers in town tend to be folks like that.
Yep.
Who, that's a mature market. The fly by night stuff all got sorted out back in 1919.
Yeah.
But it's going to be an interesting, variable, and somewhat unpredictable road for the first couple of years on something like this, I think.
Yeah.
And so my comments are mostly related to land use, although I do acknowledge also that certainly public health, safety, and welfare is a legitimate purpose of zoning, and worth thinking about as well.
Yeah, and the vote that could happen anytime. The vote doesn't have to happen in let's say 2020 or 2021. It could happen in 2025.
That's correct. It could happen anytime from theoretically from now until whenever.
Yeah. Okay.
And a vote can go both. You can vote to opt in. You can vote later to opt out. The provision is if somebody is operating at that point, they are not forbidden from continuing to operate by a future opt-out vote.
Sort of a grandfathered clause there of sorts.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Any further questions? Sounds like we have our work cut out for us. We'll need to talk about this in the near future as to what we want the Planning Commission to take a look at. And so lots of things happening in the next couple of months, and hopefully we can deal with this as well.
Great.
So thanks, Matt.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Matt.
Thanks, Matt.
Thank you.
So moving on to something simpler, I think, the VCDP grant closeout for the Old North End Community Center. And Eric just gives a few minutes to tell us a little background about this and what we need to do.
Sure. The board may recall it approved a pass-through community development grant to assist in the redevelopment of the Old North End Community Center. So what we're looking, the project's nearing completion right now, and as part of the grant conditions, have a final public hearing. Basically, share the project, take any public comment on it, and then can move forward at that point. So with our process here, I just asked the board for a motion to schedule that public hearing, and I'll work with folks involved to find a suitable date for that.
So we've done this in the past, and usually the public hearing takes a very short period of time to do, and because the project is already done. So are there questions for Eric before I ask for a motion? If not, then a motion would be in order. We have one suggested.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
And now.
Okay. I move to schedule a public hearing for the Vermont Community Development Program grant closeout for the Old North End Community Center project.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Is there a discussion on the motion? Just one thing, that this is I think the old St. Joseph's school in the Old North End of Burlington. They completed the project, and they've invited me as the chair of the select board to come to an open house in last April. Of course, that didn't happen because of the pandemic, but I anticipate that we'll be invited sometime in the next couple of months to maybe a virtual tour of it.
Okay, cool.
So if there's no further discussion, all those in favor of the motion, raise your hand. 1, 2, 3. So you passed that. Now we're back to the Planning Commission and the appointment of a person for the Planning Commission. So I'm up for discussion for the 3 candidates.
Oh boy. Well, as we said, all of them, I think, as maybe not we, but all three I would, gladly appoint tonight. I never like doing this, but I'll start discussion with Alex. And I just felt that he really had his pulse, I guess, on he more than the other two, from what I could tell. He really had his pulse on the issues, and had a sort of plan for and had thought out kind of how to move forward. I'm trying to look at my notes quickly here. And so by a narrow margin, he has risen to the top of my list.
Gordon?
Yeah, so for me, I'll chime in as well. I think all three candidates have definitely clear attributes that they would be serving the commission fine with. I was also leaning towards Alex just because of a little bit more diverseness in his background. And me being a lifelong resident here, definitely looked at, the bigger picture of where we are and where we've come from, and kind of some ideas on how to improve upon some of the things that I think people are concerned about, primarily around the Taft Corners area, because I hear your thoughts, Jeff, earlier tonight, that when I get feedback as well, it's not completely one-sided, but it feels more that it's towards what's not gone well and what it looks like, why it looks the way that it does. So I mean, like, again, they're all credible, but I would lean towards Alex.
He made a point that I hadn't really ever thought about, that is, I made note of it, and it's kind of interesting about how that concept of, I think part of what people object to about Taft's Corners, they don't feel like it's Vermont. And it may or may not be. I mean, I could see where that's definitely true, but that raises so many. That's really causing me to think. Does it have to be like Vermont? Or, yes, it isn't like Vermont, but Vermont's accessible to Taft's Corners, and it certainly. That feeling may not be so. That feeling may be more prevalent to those of us who live in Williston, and of course that's key, those who live in Williston. But I'm suspect to those who visit Taft's Corners that feeling is just a lot less prevalent, because they're just in Williston for a short time. Whether to go shopping or spend the day at work and then head back home. So that just to me showed a probing aspect of Alex that, I don't know, I picked up on.
I guess I also appreciated the candidness and the uniqueness of his answer around the conflict of interest question. I know, Jeff, you always seem to bear that load to ask that question, but I think if something doesn't feel right, or as he put it, smell right, probably you shouldn't step there. And I just appreciated that.
That was one of the better answers I've gotten in quite a while.
Yeah.
My assessment of the three are the same, that I would put Alex at the top of the list, although all three are certainly qualified. Thinking about Taft Corners, the old saying that Chittenden County is great because it's so close to Vermont. But I think we have a significant part of Vermont here in the historic district of Williston, as well as all the outlying areas as well. It's a completely different town than I think you see in a large town in Chittenden County. But anyway, I'd be looking for a motion.
Hang on, let me find. I'd move to appoint Alex Daly to the Planning Commission for an unexpired 4-year term through June 30th, 2023.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Is there any discussion on the motion?
Thank you to all three candidates for applying.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Hearing no further discussion, all those in favor of the motion, raise your hand. 1, 2, 3. So it's been done. Congratulations, Alex. I see you're still listening in. So, and sympathies to the other 2 candidates, but don't forget there will be other opportunities in the town. Moving then on to the manager's report.
Thank you, Terry. Couple things I want to touch on in my written report. Then I have something else to update the board on that I just sent out this afternoon. A couple reminders on schedule. We'll be having our select board retreat this coming Monday, the 26th at 5:30. And that will be a deeper dive into form-based code that we've spoken about a couple different times tonight. So Matt will be joining us for that for a more detailed walkthrough for the board. Then at 7 o'clock, we have our public information hearing on the lamplight water line vote that is required. So we'll have that. We'll have an opportunity for the public to ask any questions of staff or the board on that bond item. And then kind of an interesting statistic today. I was speaking with town clerk Sarah Mason, and our early voting, we have about 47, probably closer to 50% of registered voters have returned their ballots in Williston to date.
Wow.
4,000 or so. And the state of Vermont has ranked municipalities on the percentage they've received so far. And currently Williston is number 1 in the state at participation. So
all right.
It's good to be number 1 in things, especially this. So that was a nice piece of information to hear today. And I know the drop box out back is going very well. Sarah empties it multiple times a day, and she's just done a great job with this election. Yeah. And then I'll shift here to I'll just do a brief update here on regional dispatch. I had a meeting yesterday morning with the Chittenden County Public Safety Authority, and then I got this apologies, I got this memo off kind of later this afternoon. So you'll have this in writing in a little more detail, but just want to flag for the board. We'll have some discussion forthcoming on the Public Safety Authority, where we're looking with that question of capital funding to stand up the organization. You might recall it's a municipality that was formed from the ground up here with 5 communities, and looking to build that capacity to deliver dispatch services, and part to be able to offer those services for towns to contract with is to build up the physical infrastructure to actually offer those services with space, information technology, and then ultimately personnel for that. And we have a location. The authorities looked at a space above the South Burlington Police Station, which had a lease agreement on it, which is actually being gifted to the city coming up here. But what we discussed Monday morning was looking at initial capital investment of municipalities that are part of the authority towards this upfitting cost for that space to offer these services. The authority's meeting again on November 9th is looking for some feedback from each member on providing a contribution towards this cost. It's estimated $350,000. Wilson's assessment would be about $34,000. So I'll have more details on this by our next meeting in November. I just want to flag it for the board tonight. I'll be discussing with both our chiefs and finance director this in more detail tomorrow morning as well. But potentially this is something for us to look at, including in the capital budget for FY22. I'll remind the board that we contract right now for fire with Shelburne, and then police we share in-house dispatch and state police. And we've gone a little back and forth with state police the last month, looking for when that assessment may take place. And it's currently on hold now as the legislature has passed piece of legislation at the end of the session to take a closer look at this next spring. So we've known from the start here that the police side of dispatching with the free services from the state is always a variable for us to weigh in the regional question. I still think regional is a good model for us to explore and to make a decision here, but certainly we've got a little more discussion on this with the partner municipalities, and we'll continue this in the coming months. And
Do you, before you,
Sure, Jeff.
do you have any thoughts about when the authority would be looking for towns to commit to the capital costs to upfit the building in South Burlington?
Yeah, from our meeting on Monday, and I didn't want to commit anything at that point because we need to discuss this a little more internally. They're really trying to think forward into the coming fiscal year here. So trying to see whatever towns are willing to make that commitment here in the short term to shore up that piece. But beyond the building upfit, there's a number of other capital costs. I'll share with the board the full consultant's budget on this, but it's around $2 million with all the technology included as well.
Okay.
So you try to think how to cost share that and explore grants, explore other vehicles.
Yeah.
The authority is a municipality, so it potentially could look at least purchasing, bonding, but we were kind of throwing out those conceptually on Monday. Just to start.
Yeah. So, and I guess kind of the concept of it, and let's just focus on the upfit cost of $350,000, of which 34 would be Williston's share. That's kind of a go, no-go type thing, meaning that if we're going to commit $34,000 to upfit the facility, aren't we essentially also making a decision that we're buying into regional dispatch? Because why else would we spend $34,000? Does that kind of make sense? I just want to make sure I'm understanding this correctly.
Yeah, it's a good point, Jeff, and something I've been thinking about the last couple of days. The town has invested about $10,000 so far in the authority, mainly to help fund the consultant study. Some concepts I am thinking about is that 34 includes the assessment for fire and police, and as this group is working to raise enough funds, if we were just to pay an assessment based on our fire calls, it's about $8,000, about 2% of overall. And then the question for the authority is, okay, where do they make up that additional funding? And if Williston were to consider using police dispatch at some point, when you do the upfitting, you want to have capacity for anyone who may potentially be a recipient of the service when it's offered. Yeah. So it's one of those unique situations here where we're not committing to the service, but we're putting some significant financial skin in the game here for the upfit cost. Some other things I'm kicking around is, if we were to make this investment and then we decide for whatever reason we do something different with police dispatch long term, that's our long term decision. Can we build a legal mechanism in where we could essentially we have this capacity? Would the authority be open to then purchasing it back and selling it to another municipality that wants to get our capacity? I kicked that around a little bit with some colleagues the other day. I think it's a concept we could explore more, but it would at least kind of hedge that investment up front right now, where there could be a back out concept. So.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. And I think that was everything on my written report. I'll have one more thing. Other under business. Getting late.
So we'll move on to other business, and why don't you present? This is the letter of intent to participate in the Municipal Roads Grants and Aid Program.
Yeah, this is just a quick item. I would just assign a document like this, but it's I have it in front of me. It's a letter of intent to participate in a municipal roads grants and aid program, and the Regional Planning Commission and the Department of Environmental Conservation are offering these to implement best management practices for the municipal roads general permit. Williston has an opportunity to submit this and get about $21,000 in funding with a 20% local cash or in-kind match and aid. Recommend doing this. Our stormwater program can certainly use these funds to implement these funds as required. I paused and reached out because this letter of intent is authorized by the legislative body. Just to be sure that we're following the rules correctly on this one, I would just ask the board for a motion to approve a letter of intent to participate in the roads grant aid program.
Okay, I need to raise, I may have a conflict of interest because the folks who work on or offer that grant program work in the same department. Some may work in the same division as I do. So I need to point that out.
Just because they work in the same division doesn't mean you necessarily have a conflict with the proposal.
That is true. I feel it's important to point out that it's a potential conflict of interest. I feel I can be unbiased in this case. To me, it's a no-brainer.
The time frame on this is that we have to do it before the next select board meeting, and we need 3 votes.
Okay.
We would.
Yeah. So I'm ready to make the motion.
Please.
Whatever it is.
To approve the letter of intent.
Is it in our memo?
It isn't, Jeff. It came up over the last day or so here.
It'll be just a motion to approve the letter of intent to participate in the municipal roads grants and aid program.
So moved.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Is there any discussion on the motion? All those in favor of the motion, raise your hand. 1, 2, 3. So we're done. Okay.
Thank you.
Under other business, Eric mentioned the number of ballots that have been received. As of last Friday, we had about 3,300 in the Board of Civil Authority. About 5 of us met last Friday afternoon and processed 2,022 of them through the machine. And my guess is it will be meeting again this Friday to do probably about the same number. So we keep up with what's coming in, and they'll have one last shot at it on just on the last Friday before Election Day.
Okay, good. Thank you to those who are doing that.
Thanks. And the last item that I had on the list was we talked a little bit earlier on the public comment with Scott Whittier about his concerns about the Halloween day that's coming up on Saturday, the 31st, and wondered if, I know that Eric has some plans to put things out to educate the Williston residents regarding CDC recommendations and the Department of Health recommendations. I'm hoping that people in Williston use common sense, use their heads, that we don't have huge parties without social distancing and without masks. I would presume that the kids are going to be out doing trick or treating, or at least some of them are. And my guess is that they won't be out very early, but during the day. But looking at my own region of the town, usually kids are out between 5 and 6, and then they're done by 8. And they're usually come along with at least one parent, except for the teenagers, and occasionally they might be a little later, but no later than 9. Any other people have concerns with the event?
Well, my thoughts are I'm a little hesitant to get involved in setting or recommending hours. We never have in the past, and I understand the COVID issue. Whether it's increasing the hours, decreasing the hours, putting limits on the hours. I do like the idea of trying to get out good information about how to safely trick or treat, and that should be our rule, our role.
I would agree.
It's an ordinary race. Anything you need else other than that, Eric?
Nope, I'll be set. I appreciate the feedback we get from I had a call today on it as well. Folks just want to make sure. And I think just a message I send out on the town's behalf will be reassuring to folks.
And kudos to Scott for bringing it up. Really appreciate that. We probably wouldn't have had this discussion if it weren't for Scott. And so thank you to him.
Any other before we adjourn? See none. All right. Or adjourn until November 4th.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a good
Thanks.
night.
Buddy.
October 26th, don't forget though.
Yes. Right. It's on my calendar.
Actually, that'll be a warned select board meeting. So yes.
Yeah, I'll have some information out. Thanks, everybody.
All right.
Good night.